Joe Biden has just announced that he is dropping out of the 2024 presidential race. In a stunning letter that was just released moments ago by his campaign on X, formerly known as Twitter, Biden wrote, quote, that it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. He goes on to say that he will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about his decision. Just a stunning announcement from President Joe Biden that he intends to step down as a candidate in the 2024 election. I want to go straight to CNN White House correspondent Priscilla Alvarez, who was traveling with President Biden in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Priscilla, what are you learning?
Alex, this is a remarkable development, and it comes after a morning in which we heard more calls for the president to step down from members of his party, including, for example, Senator Joe Manchin. Now, the president in this letter released only moments ago walks through his accomplishments as president. And also, if I can read you this part, it says, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president." He goes on to say, while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. He goes on to say he plans to speak to the nation later this week. He also thanks Vice President Kamala Harris for, quote, being an extraordinary partner in all of this work. Now, of course, Alex, this comes after that disastrous debate performance by the president in late June. It was after that stoked so much anxiety and panic within the Democratic Party and led to a wave of calls over recent weeks for the president to step aside, to withdraw from this race. And this was something that, despite the president getting back on the campaign trail, despite private conversations with multiple lawmakers, and despite a campaign that up until this point had maintained, even just yesterday, that he was in this race, it appears that we hit that breaking point. Now, of course, the president has been at his residence here in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. He has been self-isolating because he was diagnosed with COVID earlier in the week. It was that diagnosis that pulled him off of the campaign trail at a pivotal moment. He was in Nevada. He was shoring up support with Black and Latino voters. And it was before one of his last events that he got that positive COVID diagnosis and had to be blitzed back here to the East Coast, to Delaware, where he has since been self-isolating. It has been during that time that he's also been deliberating. He is with his closest advisors and his inner circle in what has been a challenging and at times frustrating time for this campaign. Now, we should also note, Alex, that earlier today on the airwaves, the president's allies were saying that he was in it to win it. Again, this was the resounding message that we were getting from the campaign time and time again. But this letter tells us that the president, upon self-reflection, upon all of the calls from Democratic lawmakers, allies, and donors for him to step aside, has listened to those calls and has decided to not seek re-election. And what we really just cannot overstate how remarkable a moment this is. We are on the cusp of the Democratic National Convention. There have been ongoing calls to get that process underway for that virtual roll call. And now so many open-ended questions as to what happens next. We should note Vice President Kamala Harris was at a fundraiser in Massachusetts yesterday, where she too was focused on the vice presidential nominee for the Republicans, J.D. Vance. She was trying to gin up those donor dollars amid some donors deciding not to give money because of all the questions of this campaign. Of course, we'll keep eyes on her. She is in Washington, D.C. today. Many questions moving forward. But one thing has been answered, Alex, and that is that the president will not seek re-election after what has been multiple Democratic lawmakers and allies coming forward to say it was time for him to withdraw. Alex.
Yeah, Priscilla, this was announced by President Biden in a letter from the president addressed to my fellow Americans just 14 minutes ago on his X profile. It's not long. It's just one page. You mentioned Vice President Kamala Harris. He says in the second to last graph that he wants to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all of this work. and let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. Priscilla, you mentioned all the questions. Of course, one of the biggest is going to be, does this automatically mean that Vice President Kamala Harris becomes the nominee of the Democratic Party? Will there be a bit more of a competition to figure out who will be the nominee? Will President Biden endorse his vice president as that nominee? But I just want to get back to this question, Priscilla, of timing. Of course, we have seen the pressure growing from within the Democratic Party. We've seen a growing number, 36 or so Democrats coming forward publicly, lawmakers, to say that they don't believe that President Biden should be running. One of the latest is Senator Joe Manchin. He, of course, is an independent now. He's a longtime Democrat, close to the president. But it was not clear that Biden was going to be making this decision, and it certainly was not clear that he was going to be doing so today. So as of 15 minutes ago, Priscilla, where were we? And how does that make what we now know, this announcement now from President Biden, all the more shocking?
Where we were was that the campaign, his allies, had said he was staying in this race. That is what we were hearing over the course of the morning, including from his campaign co-chairs. But Alex, what everyone told us, what multiple sources told CNN is that this was ultimately the president's decision to make, that he was going to sit with this, that he was going to have those private conversations, including with his family, some of the most pivotal people influential people in his life in pivotal moments. And it was going to be ultimately his decision to make. And that is what I think this letter captures in this moment, is that after that self-reflection, he decided it was not, it didn't make any more sense for him to stick it out and do this re-election. Now, I will say, because you mentioned Vice President Kamala Harris, I had been talking to sources over the last several weeks, and what they all told me is that there was no daylight between the vice president and the president, that she was fiercely behind him, and that she was continuing this campaign as the Biden-Harris ticket. Recall that one of the first things that she said on CNN after that debate performance was that the president should be judged based off his record and not those 90 minutes. And it was that statement that was later used by many of the president's allies, including the first lady. And so this was the reality for her inner circle as well, was to stay with the president, stay in line with him, and not to flirt with any of the replacement theories that she would be the lead of the party's ticket. Now, of course, this doesn't answer the question as to what happens next, but I do think it's important to know that the vice president, certainly up until this point, has fiercely been behind the president. Now, as far as Democratic lawmakers had some of them had started to gain some consensus about the vice president becoming the nominee if President Joe Biden were to step aside, because of internal polling that suggested that she would fare well against former President Donald Trump, and also because in terms of the process, it might be easiest because she is already part of this campaign apparatus. So Democratic lawmakers, as much as they were calling out publicly for the president to drop out, were quietly also trying to sort out what this process would look like, and again, starting to mobilize behind the vice president. But again, it was unclear if the president was going to withdraw. And so a lot of these conversations have been happening behind the scenes, but how they actually come to fruition, what happens next, is still unclear. And even those who were having the conversations don't have those answers yet. And so certainly the vice president, again, we should note, is in D.C. We'll we'll wait to see if we hear from her today. But this letter from the president, this one-page letter, does not still leaves, I should say, a lot of open-ended questions. But